So today, joining us in the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast Mercy Seat, we have Dr. Kevin McGeough, who is a professor of archaeology at University of Lethbridge and a Board of Governors Research Chair in Archaeological Theory and Reception. Kevin graduated from the University of Lethbridge in 1996 with a BA in History, great distinction. He graduated from Harvard Divinity School in 1998 with an MTS, and his PhD is from the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at the University of Pennsylvania. He currently serves as the co-chair of the Department of Geography and Environment and is the incoming vice president of AZOR, or the American Society of Overseas Research. He's also the past editor of both of that organization's major journals and monograph series, Archaeological Reports Series and the Annual of AZOR. Kevin has published dozens of articles and several books, including a 3-volume series, The Ancient Near East in the 19th Century, and Representations of Antiquity in Film, From Griffith to Grindhouse. His research interests span continents from ancient Hebrew and text-based archaeologies to Iron Age tells in Jordan to an ongoing project exploring the earliest occupations of Head Smashed and Buffalo Jump with our colleague Dr. Sean Bubel and Bob Daw of the Royal Alberta Museum. But for those of you who don't know Kevin, one of his passions is the intersection of archaeology, the public, film, and of course, Indiana Jones. And it's these interests that brought the publishers of Oxford University Press to Kevin to write a book about our topic today, The Ark of the Covenant. And Kevin's latest book, and you can see it on your screen here, is Readers of the Lost Ark, Imagining the Ark of the Covenant from Ancient Times to the Present. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Kevin. Before we get going, Ken mentioned that you worked at Head Smashed In, and so I want to know, how did they fit 2 bison in the Ark?
Well, by the time we get to them, they're all butchered up and so small, right? That it's no problem. Yeah.
It's an M&I type situation.
Exactly,
I understand. Okay, yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. But in all seriousness, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us. And maybe to start off, could you give us a little bit of background and just a bit about the setting of the Ark, what it was, and when it was likely made, and a little bit about what many know as biblical times?
Yeah, sure. So the Ark of the Covenant, I think my guess is that most of the listeners to this podcast are going to know the Ark of the Covenant from Indiana Jones, from Raiders of the Lost Ark, from the golden box that Indy searches for in that film, right? I'm guessing it's more of that kind of an archaeology crowd than the biblical archaeology crowd that's tuning in to your podcast. So the Ark of the Covenant, though, the thing that Indy's searching for, it is an object that is purported to be real by the Bible. Scholars debate whether or not there ever was an ark or not. But at least from the biblical story, this was a box that Moses was commanded to build while he was up on Mount Sinai getting the 10 Commandments. So he gets the 10 Commandments and he gets very, very specific very, very specific instructions on this particular box to make. And the description is very, very vivid. There's a few words we don't understand, but essentially we have the same sense of this golden box, or a box out of acacia wood with gold plating, with staves that come out to carry it, with things on top called cherubim, which we don't actually understand all that well. Probably in ancient times they were like sphinxes. Now we kind of think of them as angels because of the Indiana Jones film and because of Renaissance art. And so this was a box then that the 10 Commandments were stored in. And as the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, God's presence was somehow connected to this box. And here the Bible stories kind of vary. The box was really dangerous, so if you touched it, even if you're a good person but you weren't ritually clean, you would die, right? So it would kill you. Sometimes God would seem to appear on top of the ark, so maybe it was thought of as like a kind of a throne for God, or like a thing to parade him around and carry him around while the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness. When they come and take the promised land, the ark seems to have kind of weapon-like qualities. So at one point it parts the Jordan River. It seems to be involved as Jericho gets destroyed, and it causes all sorts of problems when the Philistines eventually capture it. It destroys all their things. They send it back to Israel, where it is eventually installed in Jerusalem, eventually into the Temple of Solomon. And there it becomes kind of a centerpiece of Israelite worship, sort of held in the back of the Temple of Solomon, in a place where only the most holy, called the Holy of Holies, where only really ritually clean priests could go and visit. And then it kind of vanishes from the story. And the Bible doesn't really say what happens to it. We know Solomon's temple was destroyed. but we don't really know what happened to the ark. And there is this sort of ambiguity of why the biblical authors just lost interest in it and didn't care about it. There's a few hints here and there in other parts of the Bible later on about like where it could have gone and things like that, but it just seems to fall off. It's the central important artifact, and then of no interest to the writers. And so that's kind of the excitement of the ark, I think, where it's set up. If that makes sense in terms of a setting for the story of the ark for the New Brunswick listeners.
And we'll return to Ethiopia, but my recollection is that Indiana Jones just says it goes poof, right? Is that the phrase he uses?
Yeah. And then so in the Indiana Jones movies, the idea is that the pharaoh Shishak, and that's how the pharaoh is referred to in the Bible. Shoshonk's maybe a better Egyptological name for him, but the claim in that film is that Shoshonk attacks Jerusalem, takes the ark with him, and installs it back in Egypt in the lost city of Tanis, recognizing that it probably has some kind of weapon-like qualities there. But we do know that Shishak did attack what is now known as Israel around that time. He doesn't list Jerusalem as one of the cities that he attacked, but it's sort of a plausible kind of story in some ways. But there's no reason to connect Shishak with the Ark other than from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right. And there's not really, so there is a real Tanis and there is this real story, but there's no like Well of the Souls or anything like that.
No. I think, and I like the Well of the Souls, like I love the Well of the Souls. I know the map room, right? But it makes no sense.
Yeah.
Right? This makes no sense in Egyptian culture, right? You're not going to have this gigantic map room, right? Where you lay out all the buildings and you put the staff over on exactly the right spot at exactly the right moment. And then the sun shines through and shows you where the Ark is hidden. But they don't have that in Egypt. That is from Battlestar Galactica. Like they totally ripped that off of Battlestar Galactica. There's a Battlestar episode, and Dijkstra, who is the special effects guy that used to work for Lucas, he was part of the production of that movie or that TV series, and they just glaringly ripped it off.
That's great.
Interesting.
But I'm glad you've already used the phrase that. So as I indicated to you before we were online, I've somewhat crammed your book. I read it in a couple of days. But I texted Ken the other day. I said this book could be called Scholars Debate because you use that line frequently to sort of, and you've already used it here. And I think it should be the next Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones Scholars Debate. I think that would be. I think that would be the ticket.
Yeah, you can imagine that archaeologists working in the Middle East are kind of used to debating.
Yeah.
Lots of discussion in different ways, right? So it's sort of the default for the discipline.
Yes.
And so we're talking about you kind of gave us the background of what the Ark was, and we're in Moses times, and so we're talking about a period about 3,000 years ago or so. Is that we're kind of in that time frame?
Yeah, that's
and so this is a time period that the listeners will recognize as the Early Woodland. Whereas in the
Hebrew
Levant,
so they really get the message.
but in the Levant, you're talking about the Iron Age. And so can you kind of give us a broad outline of sort of what's happening like outside of the biblical world, or how the biblical stories tie into kind of broader Bronze and Iron Age culture and interactions? Sort of like how are these two things linked, and how does the Ark fit into this broader picture of what's happening in the Levant around that time?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I would say that this is probably the only setting where Early Woodland is more recognizable than Iron Age, I think. So I love that. So if, in the Levant and the Eastern Mediterranean in general, the late Bronze Age is this period of, like, for lack of a better word, internationalism. I don't like the nation terminology there, but just the idea of all these different regions that are interconnected in different ways. And they're really, really closely connected. And at the end of the late Bronze Age, all of those connections just die out. They just vanish. And we get this movement towards really, really insular kind of identity formation coming into being, sort of creating, and this sort of retraction into kind of a rural life away from heavily urbanized, maritime-oriented cultures. And so it's within that kind of context that the biblical story of the Ark kind of emerges. It's because it's right before the Ark comes into Israelite history, right before the formation of the state of Israel, right before the kingdom of Israel comes into being. And so it's sort of reflects this tradition, this period of time where there is no, like, where the larger polities are not as clear cut in a way. And then as the Ark gets incorporated into the religion of Israel, It's as Israel gains a monarchy, becomes a monarchic state, and we get the emergence of Israel. Israel's a kingdom. Now, that's sort of the biblical take on it in terms of how the Bible intersects with all this. Uh, and we don't actually know about these early stages. The archaeology and the biblical text in terms of this early Iron Age don't line up very, very well. Again, scholars debate what happens with the origins of the kingdom of Israel. But there's clearly these traditions going around that are trying to sort out where these national identities come from and why we should be thinking of ourselves oriented towards this kingdom. And in particular, Israel in the Bible is really interesting because there are all these national deities that start emerging at this time. So you start to have a god that comes to be identified with a state in a way that hadn't been before. And then along with that, with Israel, is this interesting emergence of monotheism. And the Ark seems to be tied into this emergence of the belief that there is, first off, that there's just one God that's way better than the other gods. And then eventually, by the end of the Iron Age, we're probably looking at a culture that's fully monotheistic, and they no longer believe any of the other gods actually existed. And so that's a really interesting sort of intellectual tradition that's emerging alongside of the emergence of these different kingdoms in the Iron Age Levant at this time. And so that's kind of where the Ark fits in. So if you're taking a sort of more of an archaeological view of what the Ark is, it's part of the story trying to justify or understand the emergence of the kingdom of Israel at a later time. People writing about this and thinking about it in those terms.
Gabe,
Cool.
Gabe, that sounds an awful lot like increasing sociopolitical complexity. Wouldn't you say that?
I would say that's our theme this season, Kevin.
Yeah.
Were you on the northwest coast of Israel by
put a
any
big
chance?
check mark on my page here now that we've got that that we got that
Exactly.
I live in
squared away.
Gary's
So.
podcast, right? And so that one.
Yeah. Don't worry, we'll remember you when we win a second public communication award, Kevin. But I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit, actually, because what you said, I think, actually raises some really relevant points for a question we have later down the list here. But so in the book, you talk about biblical archaeology kind of as a discipline, and you talk about some of these difficulties. Like you just mentioned that the Bible and the archaeology are sometimes difficult to reconcile. And you also mentioned throughout the book that serious biblical archaeologists aren't out like hunting for the Ark. You know, this is not what's supposed to be done. Could you just tell us sort of like why they aren't out hunting for the Ark and what it is that biblical archaeologists actually do?
Yeah. I think it's a really good question because I think biblical, out of all the archaeological disciplines, I think biblical archaeology is probably the most misunderstood, right? And there have been movements in the field to try to change the name. So for a while in the 80s, people tried calling it Syro-Palestinian archaeology. So Ken, that's why we have one of our classes at the U of L has the name Syro-Palestinian archaeology is because of that movement, right?
Well, Kevin, I couldn't help but notice that you're the vice president of ASOR, which stood for something different the last time I saw it.
That's right. Yeah, it used to be the American Schools of Oriental Research, right?
Yeah.
Right. So there's all these sort of constant name changes. So I think, in the 19th century, when people start engaging in archaeology in the Bible lands, they're really thinking that they will go out and test the Bible, but they're not really thinking that they're going to test it and it's going to come out falsely. They're going to find like positive material empirical evidence for biblical things happening. And so that's certainly the roots of the discipline is that kind of sensibility. But really by the 1960s, biblical archaeology has changed into a field that exists side by side with biblical studies, but in a different way. And so the kinds of questions that biblical archaeologists have been asking since the 1960s are really the same as the kinds of questions people will be asking in any archaeological region where you have at least a lot of material culture, right? So where you have urban life, urban issues, states, things like that. And so there are those kinds of questions. So Syro-Palestinian archaeology really has gone in that direction, and it's a little bit different than Egyptology, which still until very recently retained its art historical or philological roots. Like really, that was kind of the key thing, is to find good art or find texts in Egyptology, and biblical archaeology didn't have that. There was this really concerted effort to embrace different kinds of archaeological theory and methods. But beside that, is you always have the Bible. And then you have to deal with how people are working with the Bible. So on the one hand, the Bible has itself been the subject of scholarship for 2,000 years, right? So there is a robust body of thinking about the Bible, and and a lot of disagreement about appropriate approaches to the Bible. So you have the whole group of scholars just working on the Bible itself, and then you have biblical archaeologists that intersect with that or try to avoid it or ignore it in some way or the other. So you have archaeologists like myself who are secular, interested in the Bible for historical reasons, but don't come into it from a faith perspective. And so for me, this isn't any kind of a challenge other than making sure when I'm talking to the public that I'm, being sensitive to different faith communities and different perspectives in that way. But scholars, friends of mine who are scholars who come from a faith perspective, some of them like doing the archaeology as opposed to biblical studies because it allows them to tackle questions that don't actually question the historicity of the Bible or the potential that the Bible is divinely inspired. So we have a lot of very religious scholars that work in Jordan because there you're excavating the remains of the bad guys in the Bible, where the Bible doesn't talk very much about them. So you can skirt all the faith-based issues, or you have to worry about your school that has a religious perspective taking away your tenure because you've suggested the Bible might not be true in some way or the other, so they can kind of avoid it by working in other areas.
So
Kevin,
is there
can we ask you to rank for a minute just the different religions and their approach to biblical archaeology?
Yeah. Well, but on that, and so is there kind of a gold standard of the version of the Bible that you use? Like the listener won't know this, but you read and work with ancient Hebrew, and so are you drawing from a particular version of the Bible that or is there kind of a standard that people try to draw from?
It's King James only, Ken, please.
Yeah,
I was teaching
not Gideon's. I'm assuming that
I was teaching them some King James English for translation in class the other day. I would say Lethbridge is the only school that we know of where the geography department teaches ancient Hebrew. General course requirements. In terms of like
shalom, kiddos.
Yeah. Shalom, gang. I would say the suggestion I give to students is to use a bunch of different translations. And that's where you'll see the differences and the complexities pop up. In terms of if they're using one just to help them learn Hebrew, I suggest the Revised Standard Version because those scholars try to translate it to be very, very literal to Hebrew. And I suggest that one over the New Revised Standard Version because that translation is very good, but it's been made more politically correct. So they've taken out they made it more gender inclusive. And that's probably good for faith communities reading that or people reading as a book of literature. But when I try to learn Hebrew, which is a gendered language, that can be a bit more confusing for the students. So the Revised Standard Version is the one I suggest that they read and use in terms of capturing the Hebrew without very much theological speculation.
Yeah, and you can find that one in the bookstore being sold back right around this time of year. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would imagine so, yeah. But the NRSV is much more common, right? So
yeah. This is the time of year we don't use that edition, Ken. We switch.
And so on the language thing, our listeners know the Acadians, but you're more familiar with Acadians with 2 Ks, and this language is actually kind of includes some very important clues to the structural aspects of the Ark. And so I think you were talking about this at the start, that understanding how the Ark is actually made is a bit of a language translation issue. Is that right? Like what it should look like and what we picture it looking like because of the Indiana Jones Ark are 2 very different things.
Yeah. So especially with the Acadian, that comes into play with one of the pieces. So just for your viewers or your listeners, so when I first told my dad I was taking Acadian in grad school, he was really confused in terms of I thought you worked in the Middle East. But so Acadian is one of the languages from Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq. And so it's a really widespread Semitic language. It's related to Hebrew, but isn't the same. And so one of the things that studying Akkadian has done is really impacted biblical studies because there is so much written in Akkadian and so much that is preserved in Akkadian that suddenly we have all these texts and all of these words that are cognate words in the same language. And so one of them is cherubim, which are the things that are said to be on top of the ark. And so if you remember from the Indiana Jones film, or show the picture right closely, you can kind of see these winged angels kind of facing each other with their wings facing one another.
So for those of you listening at home and not watching the YouTube, you're just gonna have to buy the book. We'll put the show notes in there, but you'll
the next question. The next question after this description is how you get the licensing for that image. That's the
Oh yeah. So anyways, from Akkadian, we know that cherubim are probably sphinxes, right? So they're more like lion or bulls with human heads and wings. So you might have, if you've paid attention to any of Mesopotamia, if you know your Iron Age Mesopotamian palace architecture.
Well, you've come to the right place, Kevin.
yeah.
But these are the things that
There is one listener right now that is just clicking their heels, and they're like, "I knew my day would come."
Long enough, we're gonna get to the good stuff. They don't care about projectile points at all, right?
No.
Lithics.
They've got a typology of
not pointy rocks.
Yeah, they've also got a typology of cherubim on their shelf right now that they're like, here we go.
Yeah, so then cherubim gets confused over time. So eventually it gets embraced by medieval angelology, where cherubim are seen as the angels that are really close to God, and it's partially because of Augustine reading about the ark being how God comes to earth and things like that. So we imagine the cherubim as being the angels that are really close. And then in the Renaissance, they start imagining them as puto, like little babies, and that's where you get the fat babies. And they're playing off of images from Roman sculpture, Greco-Roman, but mostly it's Roman copies of Greek or Roman ones, where there's Cupid or other little babies clinging to the statues, and that's how we get our cherubim being the fat babies that they are.
Huh.
But you're Akkadian, you're more likely to think that they are sphinxes.
Okay.
Would you care to opine about Ozempic and the image of cherubim here?
I know I shouldn't be fat shaming the little babies, should I?
But one of the things, Kevin, here that you've got is about, we've talked about the Ark, and then what happens to it. So we should maybe return to that a little bit, just talk specifically about the Ark. It kind of disappears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, and it's not like narratively in the Bible it says like, and then the Ark went away and we don't know what happened to it. It's just like they stopped talking about it. They just kind of lose interest. And then we have a few hints in, kind of like allusions to it in some of the literature. And then in the apocryphal literature, so this is literature that Protestants don't see as canonical, but Catholics do, but it's written much later. Then there's some speculations about where it might come. And then in the New Testament, it seems to be tied in with some apocalyptic imagery, and that it's going to be part of when Jesus returns, the Ark will be there as well. But it seems to be missing. And so, but it's just forgotten about in the Bible. Now, part of it might be because the Bible is this curated document. And what that means is that it's a whole bunch of different stories and accounts and pieces of literature, historical accounts, legal materials that were then all combined later on by editors and then put together. So they just worked with what they had. And so there were no traditions by that point of what happens to the Ark, so they don't make it into the Bible. But narratively, it feels really weird that it just suddenly is, not part of the story anymore.
So how do we know it's in Ethiopia then?
Yeah, I know the Ethiopian. So there's a lot of people that will believe that it's in Ethiopia. I think there's two sets of groups that'll think it's in Ethiopia. So there's the Graham Hancock crowd that will have read his first book, the book that set him on the path of superstardom and pseudo-archaeology, where he basically describes the Ethiopian accounts of how it got to be in the Bible. So there'll be that crowd. But then there'll also be Ethiopian Christians and Rastafarians who it's really a significant part of their religious tradition that the Ark resides in Ethiopia. And so the story that the Ethiopian church has about this is that so there's a story in the Bible of the Queen of Sheba who comes to visit King Solomon. And in the Ethiopian version of that story, the Queen of Sheba is the Queen of Ethiopia, and she goes and her and Solomon have an affair. She becomes pregnant, goes back to Ethiopia, and when her son Menelik is old enough, he returns to Israel to meet his father. Solomon greets him, recognizes that he's his son, and recognizes that he's the firstborn son. And because he's the firstborn son, all of the covenants that have been made with God pass on to Menelik, not to Solomon's other children. And so Menelik gets the Ark, and there's different accounts of how the Ark gets back to Ethiopia. Sometimes it sort of magically gets there, other times his friends steal it. But either way, it comes back to Ethiopia with him. and gets installed in a church in Axum, where it is still thought to be to this day, right? And so there is a church in Axum where it is held. There will be one priest who gets chosen to be the priest who's in charge of the Ark, and it's their job for the rest of their life to be watching the Ark and being the only one that can come into its presence. So of course that's perfect for like the pseudo-archaeology kind of thing, where it's like, well, it's here, but we can't let you look at it, but trust us, and here are all these other texts that describe how it got here. But it's a really, really important part of Ethiopian religion. Like, you won't find Ethiopian Christians that don't believe the Ark. The Ethiopian Christians will not believe the Ark is somewhere else.
And even like Haile Selassie, right, was like supposed to be descendant from these guys you talk about in the book.
That's right. And so all of the there's a long Ethiopian dynastic tradition of claiming a connection to Solomon, right? And which kind of makes sense when you're trying to justify your authority as a dynastic leader, to try to tie yourself into some mythical famous leader. And so that ended in the 70s when Haile Selassie was deposed, right? But that was part of the Ethiopian constitution, was that it was a Solomonic line.
Yeah,
cool.
That you had a line in when you're talking about some of the pseudo-archaeology stuff that I'm sure Gabe picked up on. A friend of ours, Daryl, did an episode with us a couple of years ago about pseudo-archaeology, and could it be in Ethiopia? That is the kind of the piece that they lean into when they're like, that pseudo-archaeology is kind of leaning into, and it's trying to talk about the Ark in these ways. And so I think that I've lost my notes here, Gabe. So
well, what was I was actually thinking that so this would be a great point to talk about reception theory, which is Kevin's thing, right? Because that is a big part of how I mean, it's sort of like that this can be so important to Ethiopians while also being sort of obscure.
Yeah, and that's really one of my major research areas, is reception of archaeology. And so for the listeners or the viewers who haven't heard about reception theory, reception tradition, this kind of comes out of classical and biblical studies, where you're looking not at trying to look at the text to prove that they're right or wrong, or to find out historical things about the time that they're talking about. You're trying to look at how other communities have made sense out of these things and what kind of art it's inspired. So you can imagine, instead of, if you are doing reception history of the Bible, you might be looking at Renaissance painting, and you're not trying to argue about whether that painting is accurate to the Bible. You're looking at that painting as a piece of art and an interesting expression about the Bible. And so I've been trying to apply that to archaeology in general, and in different settings, not just biblical archaeology, but all sorts of settings, about how different communities make meaning out of archaeology, and how archaeological things come to be important to different communities, how it can be good, how it can be bad, what we have to be concerned about as archaeologists in terms of participating in this. And so the book that I've written about the Ark is really not about the Iron Age Ark so much as about how different communities have understood and reimagined the Ark over the past 2,000 years, and how it works to inspire different kinds of imagination, and why people are imagining it in certain ways and other ways, and how they use it, and how and there's always with this a kind of a question that I think we as archaeologists should be having is, okay, why is the public interest in this, and what are our ethical obligations to the public in relation to this, right? Because we're publicly funded, right? So we get our money from universities, from governments, because people are interested in this. But then
Kevin, let's see how your collective bargaining goes there at Lethbridge. But for now, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of that's kind of the big thing that I'm interested in outside of my actual digging life.
So
Cool.
and does this tie in the Ark being kind of a way to approach this idea of reception theory? Is it this you position the Ark as a meta symbol in the book, and so is that part of its power of thinking being a really good sort of heuristic for thinking about reception theory, is that it's this idea that it is a meta symbol. So can you talk about, first of all, what is a meta symbol and why the Ark fits as this, and kind of like represents a whole bunch of different things to different people?
Yeah. So a meta symbol is this kind of is a symbol that is really sort of convincing in a way, but people can fill in whatever they want to fill into it in terms of meaning. So here I'm inspired by the work by a guy named Malcolm Quinn, who wrote a book called The Swastika. Great book. And he talks about how the swastika was just an incredibly powerful propagandistic tool, because this was something that looked really ancient, like the swastika symbol looked really ancient. You could point to in lots of places. You could point to in lots of places where he claimed Indo-Aryans had lived at some point, right? And so it seemed to have really, really strong ties to the ancient world, and it was visibly recognizable. Like visually, you could immediately tell what it is. But it has absolutely no meaning in the ancient world, and so there is no baggage with it. It's just like filler for like artistic designs and things like that. So they could fill it with all the horrors of Nazi ideology, and it could come and encompass that. And so this is the same kind of process that I think is going on with the Ark, where it's this object that's described in incredibly vivid detail, and we all kind of agree on what the Ark looks like, and we all kind of have a sense of what the Ark of the Covenant is, and that's made it especially easier because of Indiana Jones, but we all have this idea of what it looks like. But what exactly it was, even the biblical authors don't agree on it. Like some say it's like a throne, some say it's a weapon, some say it's like a place for the Ten Commandments to have been held. There's also different ways you can imagine what it could do and what it did and what it symbolizes. The New Testament it creates there's a lot of metaphorical uses. So the like Mary's womb is understood to be the new Ark of the Covenant because like the Ark held
has a very Dan Brownian
yeah, exactly
thing.
Yeah. Right, there's all these kinds of things, and so that's what gives it this power to be reimagined and reinterpreted over time.
And it's so powerful, in fact, that I believe it was interfering with your microphone earlier. That all the little arcs that were behind
That's right.
you.
The ark's behind me over here.
Yeah.
So I was going to actually ask Kevin. So you acquired a replica Ark in the book. You go to a shop in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And what's in your Ark now?
Yeah,
if it's drugs, we'll cut this out. Don't worry.
I open it up and our faces all melt.
Yeah.
At the end of the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast.
Yeah.
Nova Scotia one rises up and takes over instead. In absence.
No, don't worry. There's no chance of that, Kevin.
No chance. The Oak Island. Yeah, so my daughter saw all these arcs and she's like, "Father, these need to have ghosts." And so she made and put little paper ghosts and put them all. Fill all my arcs are all filled with little paper ghosts she made a few years ago.
Good.
Yeah.
So I think probably the rest of you read books this way too, but there are certain like vignettes that really stick out to you when you read a book. And I was struck by the Parker expedition. And in part because I've also been on an archaeology project that had 2 mystics and it didn't go well. But it struck me as really a pretty astonishing saga. And can you just sort of talk a little bit about the Parker expedition and some of the ethical concerns that Ark hunting has engendered more broadly?
Yeah. So the Parker expedition, I think this is one of the more wilder stories in my book, and there's lots of other good accounts of the Parker expedition, right? Because people in my field find it's just so bizarre that it happened. But there is it
sounded like a lot of fun, I have to say, until it didn't.
until it went really bad.
Yeah.
So there's this Finnish mystic who got his PhD.
Finally, a phrase we've never heard on the podcast before. Finnish mystic.
Finnish mystic. Maybe a through line for next season, right?
Yeah, that might be the title. So there's this Finnish mystic.
Well, the unfinished mystic is the one you have to worry about. The Finnish mystic is fine.
Yeah, so he got his PhD looking for secret codes in the Bible. He became convinced that he knew where the Ark was, and he happened upon some wealthy British former military guys, probably having PTSD from the Boer War, but that wouldn't have been recognized at the time. But they were kind of like guys that couldn't be in the military anymore, but they didn't have anything else that they could do. So they raised some money to go have an Ark expedition in Jerusalem. And the idea, they raised money because they thought, well, if we find the Ark, it's going to be worth so much money. This is a really good investment. And this guy, Juvelius, knows exactly where it is. So they raised this money. And so Parker is the name of the main guy who organized it. They go to Jerusalem and they buy up some land and they pretend that they're just sort of working on building like charitable kinds of things in Jerusalem, but really they're digging around looking for stuff. And people start to get wind of this and they get worried, like, you can't just come to Jerusalem and start wrecking heritage. Like, you guys don't know how to do archaeology. Then they get
What do you think this is, New Brunswick?
They get another mystic involved, and him and Juvelius fight, and Juvelius probably engages in some sexual assault, gets kicked out of Palestine, which was called at the time, gets sent away, and they just keep digging and don't find anything, lose their money, come back another year. They realize that where they're digging is probably not going to work out, so they convince one of the guards who is in charge of the Dome of the Rock, which is the third most holy site in Islam, convinces him that the Ark is probably buried underneath the Dome of the Rock, and that kind of makes historical sense, and that the Dome of the Rock is built on top of the Second Jerusalem Temple, right? It's the center of Jerusalem, right? It would make sense that the Islamic tradition, the Western Wall is there. We know that there was earlier Jewish monuments beneath the Dome of the Rock. So it's kind of a logical place where the Ark might be. So they go into the Dome of the Rock at night and go into areas where they're not supposed to be, and then they get busted for digging in this holy site. And so then a riot breaks out in Jerusalem because it becomes apparent that these British guys are digging for Jewish artifacts in the Dome of the Rock, right? And this leads to a riot in Jerusalem, and these guys flee, make it out of Jerusalem. They end up not getting killed, but they're probably lucky to have gotten out of there alive. And so it's one of the real problems with this kind of thing, with this kind of Ark hunting, is where people imagine the Ark is. They imagine it in places that are in politically volatile locations. So Jerusalem is one of the most politically volatile locations in the world, and the Temple Mount, the Haram Sharif, where the Dome of the Rock is, where the Western Wall is, this is one of the most religiously contested sites in the world, right? This is the center of Jewish and Islamic religion, so really, really, really volatile. And so just messing around with that and stoking concerns about how you can use archaeology to make land claims, all sorts of problems. There's another one of these stories about this in my book about these British Israelists who believe that the British were the descendant, one of the lost tribes of Israel. And in the turn of the 20th century, they go to Tara, which is arising as an Irish national site, and they go digging for the Ark there, and they start destroying one of the most important Irish sites, looking for the Ark. And again, it's politically volatile, right? This is the beginning of Irish nationalism, and all sorts of chaos ensues, right? So it's a really problematic kind of thing, but it's often where pseudo-archaeology leads people.
Yeah, I thought that was like all a super interesting part of the book, actually, and I think sort of the power of the Ark in a kind of strange way. Like, it's interesting what people latch onto.
Yeah. And this is kind of what I was saying. Is like it seems to motivate people in a really, the allure or the draw of it is very, like, what you see in Indiana Jones is kind of what draws people to the Ark, is this kind of unknown power, right? And so, along with that, it's also, you've talked about millenarian movements that have kind of grabbed on to the Ark, and you mentioned it earlier that there's this kind of fascination with understanding where it is also has implications for the end of the world, and so can you talk a little bit about, like,
Emanuel, if you could insert a lightning bolt when he says "end of the world,"
yeah,
that'd be great.
Exactly. So how are people kind of engaging with the Ark today? Like, there's some interesting stories in the book about people building Arks and bringing them, bringing God to Toronto and
Well, it needs it, Ken. Frankly, in my experience,
the Ark is down at the convention center, and its powers are maybe interfering with the Leafs or something. I don't know, but so how are people engaging with the Ark today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole bunch of different ways. So, I think like the Ark in Toronto was a faith healing. It's a Brazilian church that does a faith healing thing where they bring out the Ark, and in the Bible you're not supposed to touch the Ark, but in faith healing crowds you touch these things and you get miraculously cured. So there's a great big massive event in Toronto, and they have these all over the world where people go and see the Ark, and its miraculous power heals them of all of their issues. And so it's kind of common in a very distinct late 20th century, early 21st century Protestantism and evangelicalism where that happens. That there's lots of Arks that are made in, like, Bible wax museums. Like, I love Bible wax museums. It's one of my favorite kinds of things to go. Like, I love them, right? So
I wonder if there's any in the Rossignol Cultural Center. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so people make them in those kinds of places, and they're kind of testaments to faith. So there's something kind of appealing to people about seeing, well, I read about this in the Bible, and here is a tangible physical representation of the ark, and it makes you feel like your faith has been affirmed because you've come into contact or you've seen visually what your faith could be or what it could experience. And then you have the millenarians we were talking about. These are one of the more concerning issues. And so there's a lot of millenarian movements that have basically this idea that to get Jesus to come back, or to get the Messiah to come, if it's for the first time, if you're one of the sort of Jewish kind of apocalyptic groups, you kind of need World War III to happen. That's sort of been part of the culture that's emerged, and you need to have.
Well, do you have a better idea, Kevin?
Yeah, I think we should worry about that. I think they just leave things alone. So yeah, they want to conquer. They believe there needs to be another Jewish temple, a third Jewish temple built on the Dome of the Rock, which doing that would, of course, cause World War III. But they don't have any concerns about doing this. They don't have any concerns about causing military strife, because it kind of needs to happen for Messiah to return. And so the Ark gets invoked as a symbol to get people to pay money for this. There's one particular movement. I don't want to give them any press here, so I won't say their name on YouTube or on a
It's okay. We've already said Graham Hancock and
all the problematic
and we've said the
SEO listener.
Yeah, we just need to mention Taylor Swift a couple times, and the SEO will be just like cruising.
Well, it's fine. We're actually recording this from Ethiopia, so we're about to have the fully nuclear power of the Ark of the Covenant fueling us.
That's all right. Yeah.
Oh, but so Kevin, I guess on that note, and maybe actually it's a surprisingly good segue to this question that I had just tacked on into the list here because I thought it was interesting. But you talk about fake syllogisms.
Oh yeah.
This kind of returns, and I gather you've also written a paper about this. Fake syllogisms in Jesus movies.
Yeah.
Do you want to explore this topic a little bit?
Yeah. So this was inspired by me reading some writings by Paul Schrader, who had been like a film critic, film scholar, until he realized he could make a lot more money writing scripts and directing. So you'll probably know the name more from he's the writer of Taxi Driver. Right?
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So anyway,
like the Scorsese movie?
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So really, really like understands film at a very deep and profound level. Like he's one of my favorite filmmakers.
Yeah.
And so he talks about false syllogisms, and what he means by that is this idea that he thinks film constructs in people that, and he's usually when he talks about Cecil B. DeMille and the Ten Commandments, that's kind of the example. So if you have, if you see
many of which are violated in Taxi Driver in my limited.
But if you see Moses part the Red Sea on screen, then because it happened on screen, it suggests to you then that it could have happened in real life. And so he calls this a false logic you get from seeing something visually, and because film is so convincing, and you kind of forget what you've seen and where you've seen it, but you kind of absorb that because this could happen physically somewhere, that could have been real. And so you, watching a film like Ten Commandments will reaffirm your faith in the historicity of the miracles of the Bible. And so he talks about this as a general warning about film, about how film has this power to create these false impressions that people have, and they can't keep track of it, but it's overwhelmingly powerful. And so that's kind of the false syllogism I'm talking about in this context.
And so is that kind of the idea that like we all picture the Ark as how we see it in how we've all seen it in Indiana Jones, right? Is that kind of the same idea that, there's a biblical, you've talked about it a couple times. There's actually you detail in the book, there's really detailed instructions on what this is made out of and how it should look and everything. But we all picture it coming out of, this stone, pit in the Well of Souls, and we have this idea of what it looks like, and if you just zoom closely enough, you'll see that is it R2D2 and C3PO that are engraved in the side of it? Like, so there's false syllogisms and anachronisms and all sorts of other things, right? So
yeah. Well, but it's more than that, because I think the default then is sort of like you are imagining it as you've seen in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's really hard to imagine the Ark not as you've seen in Raiders of the Lost Ark. But you have to actively work to not think of it that way. But then beyond that, you have kind of a default sense like this probably was a real thing. which in terms of
Right.
biblical scholarship is not, that would not be the default take that biblical scholars would have on the Ark. Like faith-based scholars are going to take it as being a real thing, but historical critical scholars are going to be questioning all the stories about that early period we call the United Monarchy, the early first stages of Israel. But as a general public, you're going to just think, well, I've seen the Ark before. I can imagine this is a real thing. You probably won't believe that there's miracles with it, but you'll think this was some physical object that existed, that it was an historical thing that somebody could actually find if they went looking for it in theory, right? And you'll kind of not question it. And so in that way, the Ark, I don't think there's much damage that comes from people thinking that way, but there's this larger issue then about being able to think critically about the media and how media representations are so powerful that we internalize these messages without even thinking about them anymore, without even being able to question them.
And you talk at length in the book about how the Ark has potentially been tangled up in like anti-Semitism and these kinds of things. Did you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, so one of the sort of issues that I talk about a little bit in the book is, the easiest way to describe it is from the old German name for this thing, Bibel und Babel. They talk about it, and so it's this kind of sense about the ancient world that the Nazis really embraced, but it's sort of early German scholarship. When they start to excavate in Mesopotamia, they find all these tablets. Mesopotamian accounts seem to reflect a lot of Old Testament thinking, but with anti-Semitism, what that Mesopotamian stories could suggest is that there is a non-Jewish version of the Old Testament where you could still be a Christian, but you could be virulently anti-Semitic and still not see those things as being like asynchronous, right? That they could go together. And so imagining sort of alternative ways of getting the Judaism out of Christianity, it becomes a kind of powerful force in anti-Semitism, right? It becomes one of the kind of powerful tropes that gets used. And you mix that with some of the New Testament issues where, if I think the early church really is reflecting some inter-Jewish rivalry, right? But then it doesn't always play out that way to later readers who will read the book of Luke and see things, could imagine it being very anti-Semitic in places. It probably shouldn't be read that if you're reading it historically critically, but it's easy to drag those messages out. And you can mix that in with imagining a Mesopotamian Old Testament as opposed to a Jewish one. Or you get this also with things like the idea of like pagan traditions or the origins of Christmas and things like that, because it's like, oh, let's take the Judaism out of Christianity, let's take the Judaism out of Christmas or Easter or things like that, right?
And you riff on Egypt too, right? Like Egypt is one of the ways they were trying to get around this, right?
That's another way too, right? It's another sort of powerful culture that has these connections, right? That you can lay claim to and sidestep the Jewish origins of Christianity if you want to.
It's why I have an inflatable Steve Martin on my lawn doing the King Tut right now, just to celebrate the season. Listen,
yeah. So,
I would love to
Gabe,
get one of those.
So Kevin, we're cognizant of the time, and for Gabe, it's quite long in the night there, but so you've talked about your book and your research at Cambridge. You've been on CBC, and now you're on the New Brunswick Archaeology podcast. And so I think our listeners really want to know, Kevin, where is the Ark?
Well, I can't tell you. But if you buy my next book, I will have the answers there.
Well, it's available in fine bookstores, I think. I don't actually. It's so Kevin, do the pitch here. I'm buying the book. Describe it and where it can be purchased.
Right. So it's a good question. So you can get it from Oxford, Oxford Press. And
I believe
I think
it is on both Indigo and Amazon.
Okay,
right.
Great.
And I think it runs for about $40 Canadian. Maybe less on Amazon, depending. But I also would encourage you to ask your local independent bookseller to bring it in for you. Makes
Absolutely.
for a perfect Christmas present.
And so I can say I think the intended audience would be kind of almost anyone who's kind of interested in this sort of thing. I think, and also I thought the chapters could have been read independently if you were interested in some parts more than others. But who did you kind of the audience?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how they sort of want you to write books now, because that's how they make the money now that people don't buy actual books, is they hope to sell off separate chapters by themselves, right? So they're kind of
Is that why they have the whole citation at the beginning of each chapter
I
on the
noticed
bottom
that.
of the page?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that's the new world we're moving into in terms of book publishing, right?
Oh, terrific. Okay.
But
Yeah.
it is designed for non-specialists, so I don't have footnotes, which was kind of
Yep.
weird. I used to do popular writing, and I hadn't done it for a while. But it's really meant to be a book that you don't have to have any background in this to understand, and there's a bibliography
And for the
if you do.
Yeah, exactly. For the academic audience, there's a bibliographic essay at the back that if you really want to kind of do a deep dive in sort of each of these different vignettes and stories that kind of appear in each of the chapters, there's a whole list of scholarship that you can draw on. So it fits many parties.
And I do think it would actually make quite a good Christmas present.
Yeah.
So
So, and before we sign off, though, the licensing, how did you get the picture?
So
If you're allowed to tell us.
no, I can tell you. So the cover one they paid for.
Scholars differ on how he got the picture.
Yeah, I think the cover one cost. I think it cost only about $200, right? But Lucasfilm just as a general for academic uses.
Well, the good thing we're moving this. He's $180 in the hole right now on an academic volume.
Exactly. I negotiated it for the contract. Because normally publishers pay for the cover, and then you pay for things that are inside.
Yeah.
So then, how I got the other things is if you own the object, that counts as fair use. So instead of showing the reproducing the poster from Indiana Jones, I have a photo of the VHS that I've owned for many years, and so
Excellent.
There's ways to
wait. So why is there a picture of the Ark, but you don't say where the picture was taken? Would you like to explain that? It's in Lethbridge, Alberta.
Yeah, no.
Could it be in?
It's in this one lab we haven't taken the newbie Ken to yet.
Yeah. Well, I was
tenure-
just introduced. I don't know, Kevin. I was just introduced to a new lab only a couple weeks ago. So who knows how many other labs there are deep inside the E or F wing of the longest hallway in the world.
That's right. Once you get tenure, we're going to put you on robes, and we'll take you in for the ceremony.
I just want to point out, you guys have a serious option for collective bargaining here that I don't think you've explored.
We can try it out and see.
Yeah. Kevin, before we let you go, even though it is late, how did you get into this? Like, what's your story?
Like, how did I get into the Ark of the Covenant stuff?
Yeah.
I'd always been interested in Indiana Jones stuff, right? So that's sort of primordial for me, right? It was like I remember being really interested in Egypt, and then seeing an ad with Han Solo being an archaeologist and like demanding my parents take me to it. So I've always had that long-term interest. How I got into
Mom, teach me Hebrew.
Yeah. Yeah. But then how I got into the Ark of the Covenant is the thing. Like, I basically got my friend at the University of Lethbridge, who teaches religious studies, Jim Linville. He got an email from Oxford from an acquisitions editor who had done a PhD with the same advisor that Jim had, saying, "Do you want to write a book on the Ark of the Covenant?" And Jim was like, "No, I don't, but I know who would probably like to." And I got an email. I'm like, "Yeah, of course I want to write this book." So I sort of did this as a side hustle while I'm doing other things. So
it's a pretty impressive side hustle.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Well, Kevin, it's been an absolute. Sorry, Ken, did you have another question, or were we?
No, I was going to do the exact same thing. So,
Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think Ken's about to say, Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure. So.
Yeah. It has been a pleasure. It's been great having you on, and looking forward to hearing. For those of you who don't know Kevin, if you get a chance to hear one of his talks, always entertaining, and stay tuned for, I guess, where the Ark is going to be in the. I don't know what's the next project is coming out in the next couple of years, but the answers will be revealed in due time, listener.
Yeah, and with climate change, it's very important that you know where to go in a flood.
And so it is, once again, Readers of the Lost Ark, Imagining the Ark of the Covenant from Ancient Times to the Present by Kevin McGeough, and it's from Oxford University Press. So thank you, Kevin. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah,
thanks Kevin.
Featuring Gabe Reinick and Ken Holyoke. The New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast.